Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the webinar Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in Government Service, Speaking Out About Bias and Discrimination, brought to you by the Community Relations Unit of the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights. My name is Tabitha Rodriguez, and I'm the Management Assistant with the division. I'm also your tech guide this evening. Before I introduce the speaker of this evening, allow me to review some housekeeping details. First, please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared at a later point on the division's website, njcivilrights.gov. Second, tonight's discussion follows a webinar format, so audience members will not be on camera. Your participation is important to us, so if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A feature. Questions can be directed to all panelists or specific individuals. Questions can also be submitted anonymously. We simply ask that all questions be kept on topic. We will do our best to address every question, but ask for your understanding if time constraints prevent us from doing so. Please note that the community relations staff will occasionally drop resources into the chat feature, including how to contact us in the future. Finally, if you experience any technical difficulties tonight, please explain your technical issue through the chat feature, and we will try our best to address the issue. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Sandeep Iyer, the Director of the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights. Oh, Sandeep, we're unable to hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, awesome.
Wonderful. Sorry about that, everyone. Thanks, Tabitha, for that introduction, and thanks to all of you for being here. May is AAPI Heritage Month, and it's an opportunity for us to honor the many contributions AAPI communities have made and continue to make every single day to our state, to our country. That's why I'm so glad you all have joined us for this important conversation about AAPIs in government service. Here in New Jersey, our diversity is our strength. And I'm really proud that we're now the home of over 1 million Asian Americans here in this state. And we're among the top 5 in the country in Asian American population. The Asian population here in the state has grown by 45% within the last decade. It's continuing to grow enormously. And within the Asian American community, there's great diversity too. But I want to highlight that within that diversity, there's also so much commonality. And I think my story is representative of the story of many Asian Americans, including the ones who are on today's panel. I grew up the kid of Indian immigrants who left their country in the 1970s with next to nothing. They took a big risk, leaving behind large families, and moved here to America in search of opportunity, in search of a better life. And they found it, ultimately here in Jersey, where I'm really proud to have grown up. And I'm grateful for everything this country and this state has given me and my family. But I also know, as so many in AAPI communities know, that things are far from perfect for AAPI folks here and across the rest of the country. We're in a moment where bias and hate are on the rise, including for the AAPI community. The resurgence of anti-Asian hate crimes has only been exacerbated by forces related to unfortunately, to the pandemic. And we've seen hate in the terrible mass shootings like the one in Monterey Park, California this January that killed nearly a dozen Asian Americans. That's made people fearful. Made people scared of gathering publicly, of going to their churches or their temples or their houses of worship. It's made people fear living their normal lives. So, as I know the rockstar government officials who will be speaking at this event can attest, there's so much work that's left to be done. And I'm really proud that the people you'll hear from tonight are doing that work. They're engaging in the enforcement of our criminal laws in response to bias incidents. They're enforcing our civil laws, protecting us from discrimination. They're on the front lines of the fight against gun violence. And I think we're all fortunate to call the folks who will be speaking in just a minute colleagues, because all of them have heeded the call of public service in order to do that work. They're working every day, making sacrifices to make things better for their communities. I know in my case, I felt called to public service because it's one of the small ways that I can repay the debt of gratitude I owe this country and the community where I grew up, while at the same time getting a chance to make the state safer, more welcoming for people of color, immigrants, people who look like me. And I'm sure many of the people that you'll hear from tonight feel exactly the same way. Thanks to our panelists from the Department of Law and Public Safety for joining us and giving us a bit of their time on a Wednesday evening. They are truly some of the brightest minds and most devoted public servants in the state. Thanks also to the outstanding team from the Division on Civil Rights for putting together this event. And thanks to all of you out there in the audience for joining us. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Fanny Chan Jarvis from DCR's Community Relations Unit.
Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you also for sharing your story with us and with the audience. Before I say a few more words, actually, I would like to welcome Yolanda Melville and who will be doing the closing remarks for this webinar, but I wanted to give you the chance to say hello because you've joined us early. Welcome, Yolanda.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to hearing. I want to just echo what Director Iyer said. The people who will be on this panel have worked so hard. I've emailed countless emails over the past week with them, and they are true testament of hard work and public service. So I look forward to hearing your stories, your insight, and just look forward to continuing to work with you in the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Yolanda. So let's kick things off. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, speakers. Thank you all for being with us today. I'm delighted to moderate tonight's webinar with these rock star public service professionals who will introduce themselves in just a moment. First, allow me to say a few words that will frame tonight's discussion. This webinar is presented as part of the ongoing community engagement programs that the New Jersey Division of Civil Rights coordinates to raise awareness about the anti-bias and discrimination laws that protect all New Jerseyans, including Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. This is actually our fourth webinar centering Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And we hope each and every one of the audience members will walk away tonight and from our future webinars with more tools and more information on how to speak up and report bias and discrimination. Our special guests, our rock star guests this evening, are a few among the many purpose-driven state employees who use their voices and positions to help New Jersey residents like you in the audience combat bias and discrimination. On that note, I'd like to kick off the introductions by asking Angela to start.
Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Kai. First, I wanted to thank everyone at the Division on Civil Rights who made this possible. So thank you, Fanny, Director Iyer, and everyone who put so much hard work into this. I am Deputy Solicitor General at the Office of the Attorney General, and my job here is to focus on constitutional cases on behalf of the state of New Jersey. I joined the office 2.5 years ago in 2021. I grew up in New Jersey. I am a first-generation Chinese American, and I live in Jersey City with my husband and dog. So that's me, and look forward to chatting with all of you.
Welcome, Angela. Can we popcorn over to Mayur next?
Sure. Hey, everyone.
Welcome.
My name's Mayur Saxena. I'm an Assistant Attorney General here at the Division of Law, and I oversee our work involving civil rights enforcement, labor enforcement, and special litigation. I'm a Montclair resident and a proud New Jerseyan and a member of Montclair AAPI, our local AAPI group. And I live here with my wife and our puppy. And I've returned here after a hiatus from New Jersey, after having grown up here and gone to school in Montclair as a kid after me and my parents all immigrated here from England by way of India. So super happy to be here and hear all of these perspectives. Thanks everyone for coming out.
Thank you, Mayur. Lubna, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for attending this very important panel. It's very important that the AAPI community takes part in understanding the workings of their government and encourage their investment of future AAPIs in government. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you all. My name's Lubna Kazi Chowdhury, and I'm a legal specialist in the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights Affirmative Enforcement Unit. I joined the division in July of 2021, and my background includes working as an attorney in the private sphere, as well as working in government for the New Jersey Judiciary, as well as the New Jersey Department of Health. I'm a native Californian, a diehard Lakers fan. So go Lakers, first generation Indian American, a woman of color, and a mother of 2 humans and 2 fur children, but most proudly a fierce civil rights advocate, ensuring that New Jerseyans continue to lead fair and equitable lives.
I love that intro, 2 fur children as well. I love that. That's different. Welcome next, Kazim. Would you please introduce yourself?
I would. Thank you, everyone, and good evening. I am incredibly honored to be here along with some of my wonderful public service colleagues. My name is Deputy Attorney General Gazim Bajrami, and I'm a state prosecutor assigned to the New Jersey Division of Criminal Justice's Bias Crimes and Sensitive Victims Unit. So I have, by way of background, spent every minute of my professional career in public service on behalf of the people of New Jersey. That's something I am particularly proud of. I first joined the Attorney General's office nearly 10 years ago, 90 days or so out of law school. My first assignment was with the Division of Law, and I see a pseudo former colleague here on the panel with me, so I much appreciate that. And there I handled administrative prosecutions focused on combating the indiscriminate prescribing of opioid narcotics. I joined the Division of Criminal Justice, where I am today, in 2016. And most recently, I've been assigned to handle criminal cases of bias intimidation and bias crimes of statewide significance. So, of course, it's particularly important for me to be here this evening representing my office. I join our guests and our fellow panelists this evening, not as an Asian American per se, but as a faithful ally. And I look forward to getting further into that as the night progresses. But drilling down more personally to me, I'm a first-generation Albanian American. My family immigrated from the former Yugoslavia in 1985, shortly before I came along. So I'm privileged to have that perspective, as well as the perspective, me personally, having been born here in the United States and offering a new perspective to my family and those that have come since my entry here. So I'm looking forward to a great panel this evening, and I want to thank the host for having us. Thank you.
Thank you, Kazim. Thank you all for introducing yourselves in such lovely ways where we got to know a little bit more about your roles and a little bit more about you individually. And I'm going to dive into that latter point by asking you all to indulge me with answering a prompt question, okay? And this prompt question is to allow the audience members to know you a little bit better. And so the prompt question is, because I'm blank, some people assume I am blank, but in reality, I am blank. So I'll start it off to jumpstart some ideas. So because my last name is Chan, people often assume that I do not speak English well, but in reality, I do, albeit, as I like to say, with a New York City accent. All right. So I'm going to pick on someone and have them start with the prompt. Okay. Mayur, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. This is fun. Because I am bald, people often assume that I'm not Asian, or all sorts of different ethnicities, which I find to be super fascinating. Sometimes works out in my favor, often works out not in my favor. But in reality, I am a first generation Indian American who immigrated here. And yeah, that's my answer to the prompt question.
Let's see who can go next. Angela?
Sure. So because I am Asian American, I am often told, I assume you played the piano or the violin growing up. As a matter of fact, perhaps because my parents were not persistent enough, I cannot play any of those instruments. And in fact, I was fired by my piano teacher after only a couple months because I was so terrible and did not practice.
Oh no. And your parents were probably thinking, oh, what have we done wrong?
They substituted my very young brother, I think he was 5 at the time, for the lessons, and he's a very accomplished pianist. But
at least your parents got one child
exactly.
who's a pianist.
Exactly.
Well, they also have a lawyer in you, so they should be proud of you both. Lubna, would you like to go next?
Sure. So because I'm Indian, some people assume I'm a computer whiz, and they would always call me over to fix things on the computer, get them signed on to things. But in reality, I'm decent, and I'm probably 10 years behind in computer tech.
I think you and me both in terms of being behind in technology. Yes. Thank you for sharing. Kazim, would you like to play with the prompt too?
Sure, I would. Well, because my name is Gazim Bajrami, people assume I am quote unquote foreign, whatever that means, when in reality, I'm very much born here. And when I follow up and tell those that ask that, in fact, I consider myself as American, quote unquote, as whoever is asking me that question, people assume that's a segue into asking me, well, where do your people come from? Or where are your relatives actually from? So that's been an experience of mine as it relates to the prompt.
The deathly question, where are you really from, right? You know, makes certain people cringe, myself included, makes, raises a lot of questions about bias and discrimination, So on that note, first, let me thank you all for playing along and answering that prompt question. So when we first gathered, one of the conversations that we had to prepare for tonight's webinar is, how did you personally experience bias or discrimination? And some of you alluded to that in the prompts. And I'm going to start with someone different and ask you to expand, and each of you to follow up and expand on your story of how you personally experience bias or discrimination. And then we can follow up that discussion with, how does that experience now inform your work and how do you use your voice and your position to lift up others? So Lubna, would you like to start?
Sure. I can share, I think, as long as I can remember. I came to this country when I was 9. So I was born and raised in the Middle East. Even though my parents are Indian, there was a big wave of engineers who were really wanted in the Middle East. So that's where my parents went, into the Middle East. When we first came here, I remember, going along with my parents to pretty much every appointment, to the library, to the school for admissions, everything. And I recall folks talking to my parents like they could not hear. They would talk louder. They would write things down before saying something, essentially assuming that my parents couldn't speak English. My parents spoke wonderful English, and they still do. And this still happens. As I got older, I would have the guts to say, they can hear you. You do not need to speak loud, or we speak English, things like that. But I think in my role today, as a civil rights advocate, I think that's one of the things that I'm cognizant of. I think about the fact that, although there are folks who do speak English and they can understand their civil rights, there are also folks who don't. So language is always in the back of my mind. It's always something that I think about when I advocate and when we print materials and things like that. So it is still offensive to me, but it is not lost on me that this is something that folks experience on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely, and unfortunately. Angela, could I pop one over to you?
Sure. And, Fanny, you mentioned being asked, where are you really from? And, I think probably, or actually, I think Zimba was said he was asked that question too. And I think all of us, maybe I'm presumptuous, but I think all of us have been asked that. And I find that question very unsettling because usually you have already given them an answer as to where you're from, and the person is not accepting when I say New Jersey, and I say coffee, and I say water, and I say all the things that I say from where I grew up, and nonetheless, people are like, "Where are you really from?" And they feel satisfied when I finally tell them that my family is from China, and they're like, "Ah, yes, of course." Like you were tricking me all along, or something like that. And I think that kind of conversation is very disturbing and unsettling, even though it is so common. And I don't necessarily think there's malicious intent behind it, but I think all of us who hear that certainly people can have different reactions to it. My parents actually tell me that they don't particularly care when people ask them that, because they will just say they're from China. And I think there's a generational difference in terms of how that question is answered and how it affects you. But I think at least for me, it definitely makes me feel like the person doesn't actually trust the answer when I say, I'm from New Jersey.
I completely understand. I think we all do. Can I popcorn over to Mayur?
Sure. Yeah, I think, many people experience discrimination, large and small. I can remember being in school and being told like my home smells, or my lunch smells, or like funny, or being an older adolescent, hauling stuff out of my own parents' house and getting the cops called on us because people thought there was a robbery going on. We did live in Glen Ridge. Most kind of more recently, I guess, and more relevant to law enforcement, I had an experience out of state that was a difficult interaction with the police officer. And of course, there are many amazing police officers, but when I was on an out of state vacation, I was pulled over and, rather than a standard stop for alleged speeding, I had a weapon drawn on me, and was made to get out of the car and have my hands on the hood and got the whole 9 yards. And this was in a state, Arizona, where there are a lot of issues with, law enforcement and minorities who are brown people. And it was also around the time of Eric Garner and a lot of what was happening then. And I can remember being incredibly nervous, getting pulled out of the car. I mentioned at one point, this was at a time when I was working in law enforcement, not at this office, but in a prior career. And I mentioned to the officer that I was in law enforcement, and he acted surprised and then asked me if I had my credentials on me, and I pulled them out of my trunk. And it totally changed the dynamic of our interaction, and the officer started behaving differently towards me, asked me why I was nervous, and we actually got into a conversation about it. And about how, these kind of interactions are much more fraught these days, and people need to be kind of sensitive to what people may be fearing, including fear, of government and things like that. And I've carried that with me through my career in law enforcement as well, especially understanding that people might be legitimately fearful of interacting, with government and people wielding power, and that people who are in government need to be extra sensitive to that at all times.
Wow, that was a scary situation you were put into. I'm so sorry you had to experience that. I'm going to come back to you in a bit and ask you to expand on it, but I want to give Kazim a chance to share his experience as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I just want to echo that, Mayur. That's, I think it's been covered, but quite a story. For context, I grew up in Texas. So the setting of this story takes place in suburban Houston. I developed a passion for government and politics from a very young age. So naturally, part of what juniors and seniors in high school, which is when this happened, part of what's discussed is what we want to accomplish in the future. And so I was actually in a wood shop class, a mechanics and wood shop class. And in the middle of one of these conversations, my shop teacher, who wasn't actually involved in the conversation to begin with, he just happened to be within earshot, presumably eavesdropping, heard me say something to the effect of me wanting to get into government and maybe even politics at some point in the future, and just deadpan. He turned over and for whatever reason felt that it was appropriate for him to joke that I can't be in politics because my nose is too big, and no one would vote for me because of that. Beyond being shocked, I certainly wasn't equipped with the wisdom and life experience that I have now. So I really just totally let it go. I didn't know what to say. But I still think of that conversation to this day, many, many, many years later. For the record, the joke's on him. I'm in government now. So story has a happy ending, but just goes to show you that particularly from an educator, you hear disappointing things way more often than you like. So my expansion, I thought I'd like to share that anecdote.
Thank you, Kazim. Thank you all for sharing your stories. And I want to circle back to each of you and ask you, if somebody, if a New Jerseyan were to face a very similar situation now, how would you advise them to speak out or to react, safely? Let's start with you, Mayur.
Sure. It's a complicated question with respect to this anecdote. But I think for all of these anecdotes, I think remain calm is like a good touchstone to have. That doesn't mean kind of submit or, be submissive, but keep your wits about you, keep your head on your shoulders, I think is a good principle to have, because whenever you're walking into an interaction with someone, you don't know where the other person is coming from. You don't know what kind of day they've had. I think it's easy, especially when something triggering happens, to go to an emotional place, and nobody can be blamed for that, nor should we blame ourselves for that. I think, we should take it easy on ourselves when it comes to experiencing discrimination. But to the extent that it's possible, I would say keeping a cool head, which I largely managed to do in that last situation, I think was a really important thing. And, is an important part of conversations that parents are having with their kids, every day, about, interacting with government, with law enforcement, with people who are wielding power.
Thank you, Mayor. And that's important information, especially, even if you're not a lawyer and you don't know the ins and outs of the laws, or you may not be fluent in English in order to advocate for yourself or have the presence of mind, to speak up in such a tense situation as you described. I'm going to now go to Angela. Angela, same question to you. How would you advise somebody facing a similar situation to respond?
Yeah, I think that it also depends on the context. And the most important thing, is to sort of assess the situation you're in and whether or not it's safe for you to have whatever reaction that you would like to communicate on, because sometimes it is, coming from a stranger who you probably don't want to interact with further, or if it's coming from a person who's a law enforcement officer, I can completely understand why someone would not choose that moment to react in a way that may be different than if it's a friend or someone or a colleague. And I do think that in a situation where you do feel safe in communicating your feelings about why the comment was inappropriate, that you shouldn't hesitate to do so. I understand that, often people don't want to make the other person feel uncomfortable. On the other hand, you yourself have been made to feel uncomfortable because of your heritage or your race or some other identity characteristic. And I don't think it's a problem at all to politely point out why that question or that comment is not an appropriate one, and perhaps educate the other person on that. And perhaps it's the first time they would have really appreciated that. That said, I don't think it's our jobs to be, mediators or, educators of, diversity and inclusion for everyone we come across. That is a very big burden that I don't think that individuals need to necessarily take on if they don't feel comfortable, or if they don't feel like it, or if they don't feel safe. And so I would say, it's easy later to say, oh, in the moment, I wish I could have said X or Y. It's okay. It's not on you to force a conversation if you don't if you're too tired to do it. It is okay to let it go and to complain about it if you want to your colleagues or to your friends. And of course, if there's a more direct and I'll let folks from Division on Civil Rights talk about how to make a formal complaint if it's something that you're facing direct discrimination or indirect discrimination that you want to make known.
Thank you, Angela. I'm not endorsing the following idea, but I do have a bold Asian American friend who is racially ambiguous. And whenever she is asked the question, where are you from? And the person asking that question is very persistent, and like the folks that you have encountered, Angela, do not take the initial answer as the final answer. She comes back with an answer that shuts it down. She just says, from my mother's womb, and walks away. Again, that is not an endorsement of that comment or that behavior. It's just sharing of what I have heard. Lubna, can I popcorn over to you again to share some advice for others?
Yeah, I think that as a community, as a whole, we're reminded, at least I was, I know the generations prior to me were reminded, just keep quiet, don't draw any attention, just let it go, work hard, right? Like work hard is a big tenet of who we are. That's all fine and great, but I think that one of the main reasons that I am where I am is because I want to ensure that communities such as the AAPI community are well educated. I think without the education of what your rights are and your obligations under those rights, you won't know when to recognize your civil rights have been violated, for example, right? Even prior to joining the civil rights, I recall, speaking to very professional folks who did not understand, what the LAD is, for example. So I think these are all things it's imperative for our communities to understand their rights. We have wonderful resources on our webpage that I know my colleagues will share later on. Please go there, peruse through some of the posters, peruse through some of the fact sheets, because this is information that you can share within your communities with your children, because you're going to see discrimination in employment. You're going to see discrimination in housing and in places of public accommodation. We'll jump into that a little bit later, but you need to be equipped with the education and then speak up. And you should speak up, not only for yourself, but for future generations. So absolutely important.
Well said. Thank you. And yes, we will go further into LAD, which is Law Against Discrimination, and the protected categories. In a moment, I will ask each of you to also share cases that you've been engaged in, or that your agency has, that have involved Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Before I do that, let me give Gazem a chance to expand on his experience and to offer advice to somebody who might face similar bias.
Thank you. So to me, I'm actually proud of the way that I'm going to start to answer that question. And that is to point out that it doesn't take me to tell everyone here that for many, many reasons, we are very lucky that New Jersey in 2023 is not Texas in 2004. We have made progress as a nation. Fortunately, New Jersey, I think, is ahead of the pack year after year, month after month. That's not to say that we're where we need to be. Clearly, by virtue of our multiple topics of discussion tonight, we still have a long way to go. But I think it's not a stretch to say that that comment that I experienced today, it's nothing short of, respectfully, I guess, or not respectfully, career ending for anybody who would think that making a comment like that is appropriate for especially a child, a 15 to 16-year-old child. So we've made a lot of progress. Now, if I knew of someone subjected to that kind of treatment today, part of what I mentioned earlier is a good segue into how best to respond today. And that is that you have allies. There are people out there in the community with very distinct jobs, like people here on this panel. And then even in our school networks, in our school systems, we have friends who are contemporaries at younger and younger ages that I'm seeing out when I'm in the field doing work on behalf of the office, that are incredibly up to speed on the standards that we expect today in our communities. And that's huge. So if we were going with a direct comparison, and that happened today, I would say report, have those conversations, do the best that you can to make note of what happened, advise the people that you report to who was there, every detail that you can remember. And if you determine at your own speed that you want to go through the process, make sure that that information is part and parcel with what you report on up the chain. So whether it's DCR, whether it's the school system, whether it's a family network, whether you want to go through loved ones that you turn to at home, and that's how you proceed. But you have allies, I think, much more so today than before. you're not alone out there. So make sure you take documented notes about who was there, what they heard, and then report. You don't have to keep it private. You don't have to stay silent about it. There are options out there for you.
Well said. Thank you, Kazim. Yeah. And so now I'm going to pivot a little bit and ask Lubna to start with sharing an example of a case where an Asian American and Pacific Islander New Jerseyan spoke up about the experience that they had with bias, harassment, or discrimination. And if you could also identify the quote unquote protected category, which they fell under, and expand a little bit more on the law against discrimination using that case. Thank you, Lubna.
Sure. So just a clarification, I cannot share a case from an AAPI background, but I can share a case, for example, that we had settled with reference to folks who speak English. I can share something close to that. So that does, and it does apply to the AAPI community as well. We had a barbershop in New Jersey, and they posted a note on their window that said, you know, if you do not speak English, we cannot service you, essentially. And that's a problem. Sometimes you might not see a posting that's on a window like that, but you might feel, or someone might say something close to something like that when you're seeking services, and that is not okay. I can go into the protected categories. Fanny, would you like me to give a quick background on the law against discrimination as well, so they have context?
If you wouldn't mind, briefly.
Sure.
Thank you.
So New Jersey has something called the LAD, which is the law against discrimination. It makes it unlawful to subject people to discrimination or harassment based on a protected category. The protected categories include disability, race, color, religion, national origin, nationality, which obviously applies in this talk today, pregnancy, breastfeeding. These are just some of the characteristics. They're all found on our website as well. But I want to go back into where the discrimination can take place. It could take place in employment. So your place of employment, it could take place in housing when you rent, or real estate when you go to purchase a home or sell your home, places of public accommodation such as the mall, such as a barber shop, for example, when you're seeking credit or contracting. These are some of the situations where discrimination can occur. Fanny, if you'd like to segue into anyone else?
Oh, thank you. I thought you were still going to continue with the case. On a did you want to?
Yeah, I can complete that. So in that specific case, we had a place called Cutter's Edge, and they had a posting that said, you know, if you do not speak English, we cannot service you. Obviously, that is something that we addressed. It was not it did not take place in the AAPI community, but it was something that is discriminatory under the law against discrimination. And we were successful in settling that matter in favor against the barbershop, for example.
Thank you for sharing. Could I next, oh, am I still on mute? No, I'm off. Angela, would you like to go next and share a case? A resolved case?
Sure. I don't actually have any examples of a constitutional case that necessarily involves the AAPI community per se as a party to the case. But what I will say is this. In terms of a lot of the work that I currently focus on, has to do with representing the state and defending our state firearm safety laws. For me personally, I feel like the connection that is near and dear to my heart is the ways in which individuals have used firearms to perpetrate acts of hate against the AAPI community as well as other communities. And so while the cases that I work on are usually about laws rather than individual people, I do think that the way in which individuals are affected by firearm safety laws definitely is something that I think about all the time. And so I know also that there are other cases that my office works on along with others, including Mayor, that also affect many immigrants that may or may not be Asian American, but also include Asian Americans. And one of those examples, a resolved case, is about the challenges to the Attorney General's directive about sharing information about immigrants with ICE. And that is a really important issue that affects not only the AAPI community, but also other immigrants in the state. I loved growing up here because it is a state of immigrants. And I was fortunate to grow up and have friends around me that were immigrants of various different immigration statuses. And so and that litigation is now resolved. And I think that's something that I think is so important to protect the ability of immigrants in our state to live safely and have a better relationship with law enforcement.
Thank you, Angela. Before I ask Mayura to speak, I just want to also add that a lot of the fact sheets and the information that have been mentioned by Lubna and Angela are available on njcivilrights.gov. And there are videos in different languages about the Attorney General's Immigrant Trust Directive. And there are fact sheets available in different languages, a total of 14, including Asian languages like traditional and simplified Chinese, Korean, Punjabi, Gujarati, and Hindi. And there are a few more. Please go onto our website. The resources will be dropped into the chat. Okay. Now, Mayor, if you wouldn't mind sharing a case, thank you.
Sure, I'm going to cheat and share a few, but I'll try to be quick. So, we've had cases impacting on the AAPI community, some of which are civil rights, straight up anti-discrimination cases under the LAD as described by Lubna, some of which are not, but nonetheless have significant impacts on the AAPI community. Some of these cases are local and some of these cases are national. So I'll give you a few cases to illustrate that range, and all of these cases are public. The first is a matter that was started as a complaint by the Division on Civil Rights in response to an individual complaint of someone who alleged that a landlord would not show them rental housing, ostensibly because they were Muslim or appeared to be Muslim. This case involved a pretty square facial case of discrimination and violation of the LAD in housing, which is one of the areas that the LAD protects, on the basis of religion, right? And religion can be a different category in addition to race or national origin that's protected under the LAD. And this case is an important example because when the Division on Civil Rights took this case all the way to trial. The trial judge really screwed it up. And, sometimes that does happen, right? The division expended the resources to take it all the way up on appeal to the appellate division and secured a published decision where the appellate division said that the trial court had deprived the plaintiff of her right to a fair trial and remanded the case for further trial. And so the case is called Attorney General versus William Greta. And I think it's an important indication of DCR's kind of dedication to seeing these cases through. Another case I'll describe is actually a case that is technically a labor case. but still a case under my supervision. It involved a resolution of a case against the ride-sharing company Uber that resulted in a $100 million payment into the state's unemployment insurance and temporary disability benefits fund. The reason I mention it is for two reasons. One, many AAPI individuals are Uber drivers and can avail themselves of benefits for unemployment or for temporary disability by virtue of this resolution. And another reason I mention it is because it involves something called worker misclassification. And that's where a business will call someone who is truly an employee an independent contractor when they really are an employee. They're kind of closely controlled by the employer. And other facts indicate that they really are an employee. The reason that's important is because a lot of legal protections, a lot of labor laws, and some portions of the LAD only apply to you if you are an employee. Some other protections can apply to you if you are an independent contractor, but in order to ensure that you're not deprived of those protections that it might apply to you because you're an employee, you need to make sure that your employer is not improperly misclassifying you as an independent contractor. And then the last case I'll mention is a federal case that has national consequence. But next month, our office will be going back to Texas to continue to defend the validity of the DACA policy, which is a deferred action immigration policy impacting childhood arrivals, folks who came here as children. And while in the popular imagination, DACA kind of involves immigrants who are coming from Mexico and other Latin American countries, there are thousands of DACA recipients who are of Asian origin. And when I last went to court to argue in the case, one of the parties had brought dozens of DACA recipients to court, and I was surprised to see that a majority of them were AAPI. And so I think that speaks to the importance of not only fighting for these issues on a national scale, but also of solidarity, with folks who are not AAPI. As Kazim mentioned, being a good ally, it pays dividends down the road when you need an ally.
Wow, that was a perfect segue to Kazim. But let me just point out, this is why we have you, all of you here on this webinar. You are rock star civil rights advocates. So thank you for everything that you are doing for New Jerseyans. Thank you for protecting our rights. Thank you for speaking up, and continuing to help each and every one of us combat bias and discrimination. And now to our faithful ally, Kazim.
Thank you, Fanny. I appreciate that. So I'll get right to it. So from the criminal perspective, and I know my fellow confidants in government will appreciate this, we really cannot discuss anything that is what we call ongoing or an investigation that's current, if there's litigation that's ongoing. So I really wouldn't want to jeopardize anything that we have open. And I'll just be upfront. I think this is a good thing. Any matters that have concluded or resolved and been sentenced, totally over with, there's not a direct correlation that would reflect a victim in the AAPI community. But what I do want to point out is I want our audience to be fully aware that the Attorney General's Office and the Division of Criminal Justice has a 24/7, 365-day a year unit that is specifically and expressly dedicated to investigating, prosecuting, and overseeing bias-related incidents and bias-related crimes of statewide significance. And so I don't want to get too deep into the weeds as to how the process works, but we have, from a law enforcement perspective, a statewide reporting requirement, which is not a suggestion, it's not a good idea, it is required that police departments from every corner of our state mandatorily report bias incidents. Okay, a bias incident is essentially any incident or any dispute that would touch on an individual's immutable characteristics, such as race, ethnicity, national origin, sexual preference, religion, you name it. And if anything touches on that, it is mandatorily reported. We have police officers that are dedicated, as well as prosecutors like myself, that are dedicated to reviewing these incidents on a 24-hour basis. We get them all in batches, anything and everything that happens all over the state, and we review them. When a bias incident rises to a bias crime, it is our duty to investigate them, provide whatever resources to the counties and to our local municipalities that they need, work together in a community effort to hold individuals who are proven guilty in a court of law or who plead guilty in a court of law to violating individuals' criminal related rights as it pertains to bias crimes and hold them accountable to the fullest extent of the law. So I just want our panelists, but more importantly, respectfully, of course, our audience members to be aware of that. We're on the job 24/7.
Thank you for sharing that wealth of information. Before I ask my next question of all the speakers, I do want to share one public case. This goes back to 2020. In 2020, the New Jersey Division of Civil Rights successfully investigated and prosecuted a bias case against a Somerset County man who chased an Asian woman and her 2 small children with an imitation rifle while trying to steal the woman's cell phone. This was under then Attorney General Grewal, and he had stated at the time, this man terrorized his victims and created a very dangerous situation. I commend the Montgomery Township police officers for their handling of this incident. We're committed to fully investigating and prosecuting bias crimes in New Jersey. As members of law enforcement and as a society, we need to push back against intolerance and hatred. That same commitment, runs through the Attorney General's office, and clearly you can see runs through each and every single one of our speakers today. And so on that note, I want to ask each of the speakers, why do you do the work that you do? Okay. And if we could start with Lubna.
I specifically am where I am because, again, I think education is everything. I want to make sure that I know that I can eradicate discrimination wholly, like completely. But, I have 2 children. I think about bullying. I think about bias. I think about them being in employment and facing some of the things that I faced. I never want them to undergo that. I don't want folks from immigrant communities to undergo that, folks from different religious backgrounds. So I want to be able to not only educate folks, but where I can, part of my job is to help create regulations. That's, important to me, to be able to make people's lives easier, to highlight discrimination where folks might not think it's discrimination. So, as cliche as it sounds, I want people to be able to live peacefully in New Jersey.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Can we go to Mayur next?
Sure. Lubna, I have a way more selfish and shallow reason. I do this work because it feels good. It feels good to do this work. I know I'm doing good. I know I'm representing, constituencies who may not be able to represent themselves. And I know that I'm helping operate the state's, the kind of vast machinery of the state in a way that benefits not only AAPI communities, but all types of communities across the state. I say that, especially for anyone out there who is considering potentially being a lawyer. I've done other law jobs. They don't all feel good to do. Sometimes you kind of ask yourself, I went to law school and I amassed all these skills, and I'm deploying them to what end exactly? Sometimes it's a confusing end and you don't really know where your services are going. Sometimes you have a suspicion that you're working for the bad guy. That's a really important time to pick your head up and say, hey, like, why did I get into this in the first place? You know, I wanted to do good and I wanted to feel good while I was doing it. And that's why I'm here.
Thank you for doing good. And may you always continue feeling good as you do good. Kazim, would you like to go next?
I would. I think I can get right to it, which is unusual for me. I must really be enthralled with the program. Usually there's a lot of segue. But speaking of getting right to it, I am here and I am doing this job because I feel a profound sense of gratitude and appreciation for the opportunities that I have been fortunate enough to be here taking advantage of. My parents grew up in the former Yugoslavia at a time and in a place where they were afraid of their government. You know, they would see police officers, soldiers in military fatigues, strife, the run up to civil war, discrimination based on, by way of my example, the Albanian and ethnic communities in places where their government, their central governments rather, didn't think that Albanians belonged or Muslims belonged. So in that vein, with my parents taking everything that they had, you know, my dad had $150 that he hid inside of put it inside of his shoe, and my mom had nothing. My mother came in through Canada, my father through Mexico. When I first was born, we lived in an uncle's living room collectively, and from that background, all my parents instilled in me at every chance they got was just try and do something with education. And beyond that, if you can manage to work that into your future, then the world's your oyster. You know, they weren't really privy to all America had to offer because they were busy doing whatever work that they could find, earning whatever they could just to give me the future that I wanted to make my own. Being able now to be in a position where my job is to make our community and our state, by extension, even if it's just ever so slightly a better place, to me is the perfect opportunity for me to show my appreciation for the opportunities that I've had. I'm very appreciative of my parents and my background. And I also want to play a role in making New Jersey a better place. So what better way to do it other than to be an ally here and to use my job as a bias-related prosecutor to make sure that people are not mistreated on the basis of things that they have no control over.
Thank you, Kazim. It is both a privilege and a responsibility that we all hold. That's what I'm hearing you all say. Angela, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm just reflecting on, you know, I think the reason I do my job is because I really enjoy it. And I feel privileged to do work that I actually like doing and to have a career that I chose for myself and that I truly love. And I know that's weird because I'm a lawyer and a lot of people don't like that. But that's very different from what my parents had, right? Because, you know, as everyone else on this panel probably have similar experiences, when they immigrated to this country, they couldn't necessarily pursue the job that they've always wanted. They had to come with very little money and very sort of tricky circumstances to make a living for me and my brother. And so I think that's like a huge difference. And I feel so privileged to be able to do what I like doing. But on the other hand, I do feel a bit of an obligation because there are so few AAPI faces in the courts in terms of judges, jurors, lawyers. And, you know, I saw a statistic that someone had tallied up that in the year, I think 2022, there was 1% Asian American representation in terms of lawyers who argued in the New Jersey Supreme Court. And I felt incredibly 2021, I think, and I felt incredibly strange because I realized that person was me, and that was the 1%. And I feel like that should not be the case, especially in a state with such diversity of AAPI populations. I am currently at the New Jersey State Bar Association convention, where there are so many individuals from different backgrounds, but that doesn't always get reflected in what people see as government. And so part of me feels like it's important to have representation, not only in cases involving AAPI issues, but on your run-of-the-mill cases about any other issue. And so that's a part of what makes this job meaningful to me, but also just enjoyable as well.
Thank you, Angela. And that's actually a perfect segue yet again to the next question I want to ask each speaker. Why do you think it's important for more Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders to serve in public service, in public government, especially in non-lawyer roles? If you can answer that. And I will start with Lubna, if you don't mind.
I think it's incredibly important now more than ever. You know, I'll speak to the Indian community because that's my community. When folks asked me, you know, why government, like they had like this look of like just sadness, like why as an attorney, that's my professional background, would you go into government? And I thought it was funny to me, but like it was important for me to explain it to them. It was funny to me because I know that the history and the background. In India, for example, folks who work for the government, it's not really by choice. It's either because, you know, they're seen as like government puppets. There are, you know, folks who do it for the benefits, not as great as our benefits, of course, but there are, you know, that's one of the reasons. It's also kind of like a legacy. If you're a government employee, you kind of, you know, are respected a bit more. And it really is great for your family. Here, I try to explain to people, I'm in government to make your lives better. It's important. I'm in government so our children can have equality in school. I'm in government because I want to be able to make the law, to make it better for all of us. You know, we're a very busy and thankfully well-accomplished community, but you can't X out government. It's important to have folks go into government. I'll be, you know, called over like at a dinner or so. Can you talk to my daughter? She wants to go to law school. And I'll say, excellent. I'll talk to you about law school, but I'll also talk to you about going into government. And they'll say, no, she doesn't want to go into government. She wants to be a corporate lawyer. She wants to make, you know, 7 figures. That's great. But it is important to be in government. And I encourage our community to, you know, have our children look into joining the government. There's county prosecutor's office, there's a public defender's office, and then there's, you know, all the other levels. There's the judiciary. It's important to be part of the lawmaking. It's important to be part of the government sector because we're now, you know, what is it, 1 million now out of the 9 million that comprises the AAPI community. It's going to double, triple, and we're going to want representatives in the government to be able to speak our voices, to be able to say, hey, I know, you know, I know what that means. I know what that religious or cultural practice means. And I know that it's impacted by this or that. It's very important for folks to go into government. It's very important for us to encourage our next generations to also go into government. Quick, you know, reminder, not a story, but just a reminder. I have little kids and, you know, they'll see something like a poster that says, you know, service dogs or service animals welcome in this facility. And they'll say, Mom, that's DCR. And I'll say, yes, that's DCR, but that's, you know, it's important. And I'll ask them, why is it important? And they'll say, it means someone can be helped. You know, and that means a lot for me. So.
Thank you, Lubna. That's great that your kids are seeing the posters out in the community as well. It means that we're reaching communities. That's the good news. Yeah. Mayur, would you like to address workplace diversity?
Sure. I echo a lot of what Lubna said. I can address, I think, specifically the non-lawyer aspect. It's really important, actually. Like, I think a lot of people think the Division of Law, specifically in the Attorney General's office, is just like a bunch of lawyers running around, which, we are a lot of lawyers in the building, but we rely so heavily on all of our non-lawyer staff, both within the Division of Law and at our client agencies, many of whom are organizing this event. So it's not just for community outreach efforts, for communications and publicity efforts, but it also goes to the very core of our lawyering. The $100 million Uber resolution that I described earlier would not have been possible without people to crunch numbers and do the quantitative aspects of that investigation. Our DACA litigation, which has like so many briefs filed in federal court, would not be possible without really great paralegals and secretarial staff to help us compile all of those papers. So, I think, going into government as a lawyer is super important for all of the reasons that Lubna said, but that's not all of what's going on, in our buildings. And folks from a very wide range of skill sets can come and lend their talents to the state government to do all of this great work that we're talking about. And I think that's super important.
Right. I echo that. And as a community relations specialist and not a lawyer, I would highly advocate people going into public government in any capacity that they wish to serve, because yes, we will be working alongside lawyers and we need to decipher and translate the legalese into plain language and accessible language for the non-lawyer public. So that was my plug. But Gazim, would you like to go next to address workplace diversity?
I would, and my favorite way to try to encapsulate this topic is by a simple phrase. And I like to say, a voice inside the room is heard a lot louder and a lot more clear than a voice outside the room. And it really can be that simple. We know it's not always, but it really can be that simple. And I think that there is no better way than to have communities, neighborhoods, families represented than if people are there themselves in person, playing a role, taking a stake, holding it, advocating for it. And from my perspective, instead of guessing, well, what would this community think and how do we best come across with this and what's the best way to attack this, it would make everyone's lives easier, including, if I do say so, our panelists who are already in government, to have the people in the room that you want to have those conversations with. So I have never shied away from getting diversity whenever and wherever we can get it. I don't want to just leave it as a generic phrase. What I want to say is the best way to make a difference is to be the difference. And I know that there are the seven-figure folks. I totally understand that. But even if it's not in an attorney's role, I've always said that government doesn't necessarily have to be a full career. It can be, and I'm in favor of it. But even just gaining that perspective at one point, even if it's early in your career, not only does it help you advance should you want to seek a career in the private sector, but you leave an impact where you go. So your voice echoes long after you're gone, and it benefits everyone who's going to remain there. So the main access point to me is getting that foot in the door. And it not only benefits the people that are there, of course, but the people that you want to advocate for, who are out there living their lives, and they're going to be better for it if you're there.
I like that very much, what you said. Angela, do you want to expand on your earlier points?
I'll just say very quickly, in terms of the non-lawyer aspect, it is probably not that usual that a member of the community would be dealing with a government lawyer in their day-to-day. It is possible. And so that means, though, that many of us have day-to-day interactions with other public servants and government employees where representation matters. And that includes police officers, home inspectors, elected officials, teachers. And in those interactions, representation is important in at least two different ways. The first is, similar to what Gizim said, people who are in the room who either make decisions or carry out decisions directly with members of the community who have lived experiences or background information can actually better represent the people who are affected every day. And that may not necessarily be, you can only represent the experiences of your own community, or that everyone would represent their own community in the same way, but rather it's just more likely that people who have experienced different walks of life, including being an immigrant, not speaking English as their first language, or any number of other experiences, would have a different perspective for everyday things like investigating an incident or talking to a student. The other way in terms of representation is how you can perhaps unknowingly become an example to other people. I did not have a single teacher in growing up that was Asian American, and that I don't know if I really noticed it at the time, but I think it makes a difference in terms of how a person thinks of themselves, their belonging, as well as what career paths you could have been influenced by. And so the same goes for some of these other jobs that I mentioned: police officers, elected officials, lawyers, etc. And so I think that's really, really important as well.
Oops. There we go. Thank you, Angela. Thank you all for being a part of this wonderful discussion. It is not time to let you go. It is time for us to pivot to the presentation on the NJ bias presentation. And before we do that, a note to the audience. If you have any questions for the individual speakers or for the group, please drop them into the Q&A tab. We will get to the questions after the presentation by Patricia Williamson, who is with the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights. And just before she presents in a moment, I'm going to ask Lubna if you could just repeat the different protected categories under the law against discrimination. So we just have a review on that. And then we'll have Patricia present on the NJ bias system, which is the complaint online portal. Thank you, Lubna and Patricia.
Sure. So the protected categories or characteristics, as we also call them, under the law against discrimination in New Jersey include actual or perceived. And I'd like to just quickly define that. Actual means, what the person actually doing the discrimination or causing the discriminatory act, whether or not they think that you are from a certain religion or not. It could also be perceived, which means that they can think that you are from a certain religion or national origin. So either one of those is possible. And the protected characteristics or categories include disability, race, color, religion or creed, national origin, nationality or ancestry, gender or sex, gender identity or expression, sexual or affectional orientation, pregnancy or breastfeeding or chest feeding, liability for service in the U.S. military, and in some cases, familial status, such as in housing, age, genetic information, or lawful source of income.
Thank you, Lubna. And now for my awesome colleague, a rock star in the Community Relations Unit, Patricia Williamson.
Thank you so much, Fanny, and good evening, everyone. My name is Patricia Williamson. I'm a community relations specialist along with Fanny in the Community Relations Unit of the Division on Civil Rights, and it's a pleasure to be here. My primary areas of focus are race, religion, and creed, such as the Native Americans and Indigenous peoples. I was asked earlier on to also provide an example as everyone else did. And so mine really piggybacks off of Angela. Because I am African American, there are some that assume when I say that I'm an accomplished pianist, which I am, that I am able to play the piano by ear. And that is not the case. I am accomplished in classical. I read by note. And if I do hear something by ear, the best I can do with perfect pitch is tell someone what key or what signature they're in, and then they have to figure out how to play the music themselves. So that is my statement for that. And so with that, I'm going to go into I'm going to share my screen and show a brief presentation. Okay. This will be on New Jersey Bias Investigation Access System, which we also call NJ Bias, and a little bit about the Division on Civil Rights process. So DCR, the Division on Civil Rights, we have an online portal to file a complaint. If you feel you've been discriminated against, you can file a complaint with DCR. And in order to do that, you must first submit what's called an intake form. And you can submit the intake form online by creating an account and using the NJ Bias Investigation Access System, which we call NJ Bias. And the website is https://bias.njcivilrights.gov. And I also want to read in your hearing the phone number, because DCR also offers translation services for people with limited English proficiency who speak other languages. So you can call 1-833-NJDCR4U, or you can, that number is 833-653-2748. Or you can call the housing hotline, which is 1-866-405-3050, and ask for a DCR receptionist to assist you in filling out the form on NJ Bias. You can also email njdcr4u@njcivilrights.gov to request assistance with NJ Bias in a language other than English or Spanish. I want to note that retaliation is prohibited, and the statute of limitations is 180 days for the Law Against Discrimination, the Fair Chance in Housing Act, and the Family Leave Act. When you file online, this is what you'll see on your screen when you file a complaint. So these are two different screens. The one on the left-hand side is the home page. And so if you were to file a complaint regarding discrimination, harassment, or retaliation, for the Division on Civil Rights, you would use one of the 5 icons that's on the top. And if you're going to file a complaint in terms of a bias crime, then you would use the icon at the bottom, which is the New Jersey Division of Criminal Justice, which is different than ours, but that's the same one as one of our panelists today. So I'm focusing on the top 5 right now. Housing, if a person has a criminal background and they're discriminated against, then there's housing, employment, New Jersey Family Leave Act, and the place of public accommodation. So as an example, a pregnant Asian Muslim woman who works as a salesperson in a small bookstore files a complaint that her employer refuses to accommodate her need to pray at certain times and to have regular bathroom breaks. She's a part of several protected classes of the law against discrimination, including race, Asian, religion, Muslim, gender, female, and pregnancy, which is also covered under the law against discrimination. She may file a complaint using the employment tab on the NJ Bias portal. On the right-hand side, how to file with NJ Bias, there's step-by-step instructions in English and Spanish. The top two from the left and the right are the manual for the complainants and the manual for the respondents, which I'll explain in a moment. And then the bottom two blue bars are for the same thing, but in Spanish. To tell you a little bit more about the DCR intake process, as part of the intake form, the constituent will be able to schedule an intake interview with a DCR investigator. During the interview, the investigator will ask questions to ascertain whether DCR has jurisdiction over the complaint. That means whether the complaint alleges a violation of the law against discrimination that occurred within the past 180 days. If so, DCR will prepare a verified complaint form for signature. And once the constituent signs the verified complaint, they are then known as the complainant. DCR will serve the verified complaint on the respondent. And that person or that party that may have violated complainant's civil rights, they have a chance to respond with their own version of events. Now, I'd also like to mention a person or an organization may file a complaint on behalf of an individual who experienced actual or perceived bias. This option is called a non-attorney advocate for the complainant and may be exercised by friends, families, or community advocates to support individuals, including residents with limited English proficiency. Continuing with the process, DCR conducts investigations, and these may include interviews with the complainant, the respondent, and witnesses, a review of relevant documents, photos, and video recordings. And at the end of the investigation, if the parties have not reached a mutually agreeable resolution of the complaint, DCR will determine whether there is probable cause to believe a violation of the LAD occurred. If DCR believes a violation did occur, it will prosecute the violation in court or the Office of Administrative Law. And at the conclusion of the case, DCR can order monetary damages to the victim and equitable relief. The NJ bias process may take weeks or months to investigate. Complainants have also worked with their company's HR departments if the issues with employment or have sought out legal advice and community support. We do want to mention that the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights and its employees do not provide legal counsel or legal advice. And so today's presentation is for information purposes only. NJ bias is a useful tool for all New Jersey residents, and DCR is an accessible resource and is willing to help you. So with that, I will stop. Well, before I stop sharing, I do want to say thank you and just show again, we will put this information in the chat, but this is how you can contact us in terms of NJ civilrights.gov. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter, and those are our hashtags. And our email is communityrelations@njcivilrights.gov. So I thank you, and I'll turn this back over to Fanny.
Thank you, Patricia. That was very detailed. Right. I'm going to actually take two of the questions from the Q&A and actually direct them to you, Patricia. Okay. And then we will take more questions for the individual speakers. Patricia, can you clarify if people can report an incident to the New Jersey Division of Civil Rights if they are from out of state but the incident happened in New Jersey.
Yes, if the incident happens in New Jersey, then yes, they can report it even if they are out of state. And that's a great question, because the opposite is not true. We are out of jurisdiction if something happens to a person from New Jersey, but it happens in a different state.
Thank you. The next question, also clarification on the NJ bias system. Can you report incidents anonymously?
Well, you can, in a sense you can, but it's difficult, because if one needs to, as I mentioned in the process, speak to you, we need a complainant. And so we need someone to interview, to investigate, to have the information. And so what I would recommend, if someone wanted to do that, if someone wanted to report anonymously, then perhaps they should partner with an advocate, a non-attorney advocate, so that a complainant can so that person or that organization can file the complaint on the anonymous person's behalf.
Thank you, Patricia. Mayor, I see you nodding your head, as well as Kazim. If you could both expand on that answer, because you both had also mentioned different complaint lines through your divisions.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. That's totally right, Patricia. Anonymous complaints can still be helpful. It's just that they vary, right? If we get a single anonymous complaint that has no kind of leads for us, no number to call or no person to have an additional discussion with, it's hard. There's not a lot that we can do with it. But if we get an anonymous complaint that has someone for us to talk to, whether that's an intermediary, that's an advocacy organization, or just someone else who would be willing to interface with the government directly, then at least we have somewhere to go. And even better if we receive, let's say, a bunch of anonymous complaints, all complaining about wrongdoing happening by the same employer or at the same location, because then we have a potential pattern and practice where we may not even need an individual complainant to prosecute a violation. So in addition to individual complainants being able to bring complaints to DCR, for example, the Attorney General or the director of the Division on Civil Rights can themselves bring an investigation or a litigation if a kind of pattern and practice, a kind of systemic issue impacting multiple people is raised. So those are all, I think, things to be aware of in terms of thinking about anonymous complaints.
Kazim and then Lubna, I see you with your hand up. Kazim first.
Sure. Mine will be quick. Well, the answer, if the question is, would we accept or sort of take an anonymous complaint? The answer is yes, of course. Now, from a legal perspective, does that present or potentially present issues in proofs or evidence? Frankly, that's something that's our job to determine. But I would not want to send a mixed signal. We will always accept whatever information is provided to us. Would we prefer an individual's identity so we can reach out to that person? Absolutely. There's no two ways about it, because just like the civil world, the criminal world, and in some cases, because we do have a higher standard of proof, it does require us to reach out to somebody to corroborate certain information. There may be details out there that seem insignificant to the reporter, but that turn out to be incredibly important for the investigation. So in summary, the answer is yes, we'll take anonymous tips. Whether that presents an issue down the line in terms of prosecution and potential charges, that's for us to figure out. Sometimes it could be an issue. Other times we are able to reveal through the course of an investigation enough information to supplement that gap, and we can get on just fine. So it really depends. But yes, we will always take information, even if it's anonymous.
Lubna,
Yeah, those are both excellent points, and thank you for making those. I was just going to follow up on that, but you both did a wonderful job. The other reminder I just want to bring up for folks is that the Division of, just to paint a picture, the Division on Civil Rights belongs under the umbrella of the main agency of the Attorney General's office and the Department of Law and Public Safety. So our agency, DCR, has the power to enforce the law against discrimination, the New Jersey Family Leave Act, or the NJFLA, which is the job protected leave to care for family members. And then as of January of last year, the Fair Chance in Housing Act, so, or the FCHA. There's 3 laws that we have the power to enforce. One of those questions I think someone asked was, what if I am out of state, or, I guess the act happened in New Jersey. One thing we've been seeing is that since the pandemic, when a lot of employers no longer are requiring folks to come in to work physically, for example, you have companies, employers that are in another state, but their employee is a New Jersey resident. And let's say this concerns the New Jersey Family Leave Act. The question comes about is, does the employer still have to enforce my leave, or are they going to allow me to take an NJFLA type of leave, even if they're in Pennsylvania or Connecticut or New York? And that's really a case-by-case basis. It does not mean that, you cannot file a discrimination complaint on AAPIs because they are in Pennsylvania. You should still talk to us. You should still file that if your NJFLA rights have been violated, because it could be that you are a contractor that whose contract says, the state that you reside in is the state whose laws apply in any employee related matters.
Thank you for providing more details. Another question in the Q&A tab was, if someone witnesses an incident, can they complain anonymously? Not if the incident happened to them, but if they witnessed it. Angela, would you like to chime in? Or anybody else?
Yeah, Angela, yeah, I'll tackle this one. So I think, again, witnesses can and should, report if they've observed potential violations of law or wrongdoing to the AG's office. We don't want to discourage those kinds of reports. The lawyerly thing to point out here is that if something happened to you and you're the victim or the complainant, then sometimes that allows the agency to start its kind of complaint process, right? Because you trigger something in the law that says when a complainant reports something to the agency, then, at DCR, for example, a whole kind of process for processing that complaint begins. When a witness reports something to an agency, that can still be important and relevant information for law enforcers. And it could, as I kind of mentioned before, lead to the filing of a complaint, especially if it's the type of information that shows a pattern in practice or a significant violation of law. So we wouldn't want to cut off those kind of reports, and we continue to encourage them. But the thing to note is that it won't kind of automatically trigger, the process that would be triggered when a complainant reports something. So there is a difference in terms of how those reports are handled by the agencies.
Thank you. Angela, I see you nodding your head. Did you want to expand on that?
No, that all sounds good to me, and that sounds correct.
Yeah. Another question that was dropped is,
Excuse me, Lubna has her hand up.
oh,
Like to
apologies. Thank you, Patricia. Lubna?
I just wanted to add one other note about retaliation. So when a lot of folks are, hesitant to make a complaint, one of the reasons is, I don't want to be in the limelight. I don't want to be recognized. Another reason is I don't want to lose my job, although I witnessed something. I'm afraid that I'm going to be, I'm going to face repercussions because I'm complaining about something. One thing that I want to remind folks is that whether or not there is the alleged discrimination is held up, it is verified, viable, does not matter for a retaliation action. So if you lose your job because you witnessed something and you complained about it as being an LAD violation, that act, that employer, for example, dismissing someone because of their race, and you complained about it, that action does not have to really live and come to fruition for your retaliation to live. So it's separate and apart. Your retaliation action can be held up in court if you were fired, if you were let go because you complained about your employer discriminating against someone else. So again, come forward, make that complaint. Do not be fearful of retaliation.
I was having trouble unmuting myself. Thank you, Lubna. That was really important point to share. Let me go to what seems to be the last question, which relates to what you just said, Lubna. If you have a problem with a coworker, can you report, if you have a problem with a coworker and you report it to Human Resources and nothing has been done about it, and this part wasn't asked, but I'm assuming the guest is asking, what can they do about it? If they have a problem with a coworker and HR does nothing, what would you advise them to do? We can start with Lubna.
I was going to say I could take that as well. That is a duty for the employer, for example, to ensure that there is no harassment, that there is no hostility against you, because let's say someone is calling you names against that are discriminatory to your national origin. There is strong case law actually in New Jersey where there were two brothers who were working in a financial firm. They faced a lot of discriminatory and derogatory comments. The employer did nothing, and that is also discrimination. So you should report even if your employer is not doing anything and just sitting through all of those actions.
Would anyone like to expand on that?
Yeah, sure. I would just say that, when your supervisor is discriminating against you, or your employer is discriminating against you by firing you or by not hiring you as an applicant, you have a direct claim against your employer, potentially for unlawful discrimination. When your coworker is harassing you or discriminating against you, the reason what Lubna said was important is, that's in a sense what HR is for, right? In part, HR is supposed to absorb those complaints, do an investigation, figure out what's going on, and remedy the problem. That's an employer's duty. And if the employer is failing in that duty, then the employer can be liable potentially for not doing anything about the coworker's harassment or allowing it to continue or countenancing it. So it's just an important thing to keep in mind that if something is going on at work involving a coworker, just be mindful, continue to kind of write things down, write down what's going on, what is being done by your employer about it, what isn't being done by your employer about it. All of those things are ultimately important when you are reporting or making a complaint.
Definitely building evidence, right? Collecting evidence, writing things down, documenting your experiences is all absolutely critical to building a case. Did anybody else want to expand on that question? If not, that seems to be the last question that was dropped in the Q&A tab. And we still have time on this webinar. So before we bring on Yolanda and have her do the closing remarks, I actually want to come back to the speakers and ask you another prompt question to wrap things up. First, thank you, each and every one of you, for sharing your stories, your journeys, and most of all, your wisdom. Right? I know each and every one of you will be tagged for future career talks, if not future webinars with DCR or beyond. So thank you for being a part of this webinar. But here we go with another fun prompt. Okay. What is the last podcast, book, movie that you have enjoyed that has featured an Asian American or Pacific Islander? And if it addressed bias or discrimination, even better. I see smiles, I see thoughts, I see brains turnings. I will go to Gazim first. How's that?
So I am going to admit something that I didn't think I would be discussing today, but I fancy myself quite the fan of fashion and style for a variety of reasons that don't need to be discussed. But the proprietor of that blog is an individual who discusses his background pretty regularly. The blog is called Put This On. And I'm just trying to locate as we speak. So the blog is Put This On, and it's an individual whose name is Jesse Thorne, who identifies as Asian American. And he has quite the eclectic style and fashion that he profiles in his Twitter account and then in the blog for Put This On. So I'm a big follower. I will admit I have either opted not to wear certain outfits or, in the alternative, decided to make certain purchases based on Jesse's advice. So it's a great follow. I suggest you check it out.
There we go. Again, trouble with the mute button. Oh, that is so cool. So at the next webinar or the next event where we see you, Gazim, we expect you to be outfitted in something unique that this blogger suggested. Yes? Can we get a?
That's a high standard now. I think there'll be more focus on me than I like, but I'll do my best.
Okay. Lubna, would you like to go next?
So part of the reasons why I love working for the Division on Civil Rights is I have wonderful colleagues, and they had gifted me with See No Stranger. It's a great book by Valerie Kaur. Wonderful book, also an author who is a civil rights advocate, hails from California. And she talks about her family's, a multitude of things, but she talks about her family's really like early life in Northern California, where a lot of the, folks came from Punjab to farm, were brought into California to farm. She talks about childhood trauma. She talks about being a civil rights advocate. She talks about being in a new country and family being in a new country. So a wonderful book. I couldn't put it down. Definitely recommend it. And again, proud that it's an AAPI author. See No Stranger.
Here we go again. Apologies. Thank you for sharing, Lubna. Angela, would you like to go next?
Sure. So I am a big fan of reading fiction, and it's been an amazing recent experience seeing so many Asian American authors of fiction of really interesting and great books. I have so many that I can't even list them, but one really recent one that I read is called Joan is Okay by a Chinese American author named Wei-Ko Wang. And it's both funny and sad and very poignant at the same time about an Asian American ICU doctor in New York and sort of how she thinks about life and loneliness and her career. And it made me laugh and sad at the same time. It was just a wonderful read. And I'll say, when I was growing up, there was a couple prototypical Asian American authors that were ever read or introduced in schools, Joy Luck Club. Later on in college, I read some other authors, but it's really wonderful from my perspective as a reader to have so many Asian American voices, sometimes books that don't have to do necessarily with Asian American characters. And that is also pleasant as well, to have sort of a range of different options where the authors are Asian American or the subject matter is Asian American. So just a plug out there for the wonderful sort of literary community that exists now by Asian American authors. Oh, and I see we have it in the chat.
Yes, thank you, Kai, for dropping the links to the suggested books and blogs and yes, books, the 2 books in the chat. Meyer, you're up next.
Sure. Yeah, Angela, totally right. I'm like, I have like now multiple AAPI college classmates who are published authors of novels and things like that, who I try to keep up with and read. One of their names is Tanya James, who recently put out her 3rd or 4th novel called Loot. And another is V.V. Ganeshanathan. Just type in like V.V. Ganesh, like the god, and you'll probably find it. She's a really amazing author and podcast host, actually, of a podcast called Fiction Nonfiction that analyzes kind of current events through the lens of fiction with fiction authors. But my pick is like way more lowbrow, but also awesome, which is everybody, if they haven't, needs to read the Miss Marvel comics. They are amazing. They're about Kamala Khan, a AAPI resident of New Jersey, of Jersey City, of all places. And now they're, turned into a Netflix series. And I'm sure she's going to start making appearances, if she hasn't already, in like the multiverse of Marvel movies. So big shouts to Miss Marvel.
Yes, definitely, because Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders can indeed be superheroes, in addition to rock stars, in addition to lawyers and community relations professionals. Thank you all for playing along with that prompt, and again for sharing your stories and your wisdom. Before we close out, is there any last thought you wanted to share with the audience? Anybody? And then we'll turn it over to Yolanda.
I'll just say thank you all for coming out. We really appreciate it. We do these outreach efforts. They are really important. We want to feel a real connection to the community. We want to be proactive about building bridges of trust, with the community. So folks will feel comfortable coming to us with complaints as witnesses, as employees, and a big thanks to crew and all of the outreach staff for putting this together.
Thank you. Please stay on. Yolanda, you have the floor. Would you mind reintroducing yourself for any audience member who joined later?
Sure. Again, I just want to say thank you for allowing me to join and give closing remarks tonight. I'm Yolanda Melville. I'm a senior counsel in the Office of the Attorney General and Director of Community Engagement. And I also want to play along with the last prompt. It made me smile because I thought about Priyanka Chopra And I don't know if anybody remembers Quantico. That was a series where she was breaking into an acting career on this side. Now she's Priyanka Chopra Jonas, but she was a lead FBI trainee. And she was the first woman I saw who was in a role like that, who was a minority. And that, I mean, it was very lowbrow at some points, but at some points, it really showcased the dynamic addition that she was, being a woman who had a perspective and why she was chosen to be part of that academy at the time. So if you have an opportunity to watch it, I recommend it. So thank you, Fanny, for doing an amazing job, and Patricia and the DC crew team for your phenomenal webinar. Thank you to tonight's panelists, Gesem, Angela, Lubna, and Mayor. You were all fantastic. Thank you for your insight, for your work, not just tonight, but every day that you work with us here. In this role as Senior Counsel and Director of Community Engagement, I work with many of you to create and further meaningful initiatives, to learn about you and your great work, which I've done already with some of you, to deliver effective and responsible messaging about the work that you do and educate the community about that work, and deepen those relationships and that trust that the community has with our office. And that work does not happen in a vacuum. I think my role can be best described as a perpetual learning journey. And I think that happened tonight as well. So thank you. So here are a few highlights from tonight that resonated with me as I was listening, and I took copious notes. So first, here we are all here to take an oath. We carry out justice through an oath. But it's important to understand that we all bring a lived experience to the table, and they influence why we chose to work here at LPS. We are not a monolith. Many of us here on the panel tonight share different perspectives, and we should be mindful about categorizing being a member of the AAPI community as all that he, she, or they has to offer and who they are. So please continue to build community with others and learn about the diverse array of perspectives without assumptions and judgment. What people may not know about me, something I shared with crew during a recent meeting. My first language was not English. It was actually Tagalog. So I'm not Filipino. That's a language that is native to the Philippines. I'm not Filipino. But my babysitter, growing up in New York, was an older Filipino woman. And all I knew is that her name was Lola. And for people who know the Filipino culture, Lola is mostly a term commonly used for grandmother. And I don't know much Tagalog today, but I can tell you that something that Director Iyer mentioned earlier, we have commonalities in spite of our differences. And at age 3, when I was at her home, no one could tell me that Lola was not my grandmother. I didn't know that she was different. I'm a first generation American on my mother's side, but I think I have the privilege, I call it a privilege, that she immigrated to this country knowing English. English was her first language because she came from a country that spoke English. But she often told me about the setbacks as an immigrant, having a green card, if you will, and those challenges that came from that. And in my lived experience and learning from her, I'm also very understanding, and it shaped me in being more mindful and considerate of those who have barriers to attaining the American dream, whether it's immigration or speaking a different language or just being different in some kind of way. We talked earlier about the question, where are you from? Where are you really from? Like that happens to me a lot, and it makes me equally cringe when it happens. I am Black, but I am of mixed heritage, and my grandmother is actually of Indian descent. She immigrated to the Caribbean and later to America, but I consider myself a Black person. So although I'm not from New Jersey, it's already exhausting enough to explain what part of the United States I'm from. So then explain where my family is from, it's even more exhausting. So for those who are allies to us, who experience those lines of questioning, please be mindful and try to be an upstander. For those, when you hear someone asking those questions, try to be an upstander and intervene if you can, and be considerate of what that must feel like. As allies, encourage your friends and your family to speak up. I know I have about a minute left, so I'll wrap up. Lubna encouraged us to share our experiences, share our resources through the LAD, use the NJ Bias portal. As I mentioned, in other states across America, even tonight, a webinar like this would never happen. So even in 2023, we have to be fortunate. We're mindful of being fortunate that we have a legal avenue such as the law against discrimination that predates the Federal Civil Rights Act of itself. Build community, share your experiences, but also understand you're not alone. Stay connected with the Office of the Attorney General, including but not limited to the Division on Civil Rights and the Division of Criminal Justice. Thank you to Angela and what you said. So thank you for being representative. Representation within our courts as attorneys, as litigators, as jurors on the bench. That's valuable to how we actually effectuate justice. Encourage others to explore public service careers, like Mayor mentioned. We are not all attorneys, so diversity at every level of what we do is necessary. So in conclusion, we have the choice to safely stand up and speak out when faced with bias, discrimination, prejudice, and hate. We also have many avenues of support, whether seeking out personal justice or creating positive change for others. You heard that here tonight, so please take it with you. To each of you who listened, thank you for attending. Thank you for asking questions. And again, thank you, Fanny, Patricia, everyone on the panel for your work tonight. It was great, so thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, attendees who joined us live, and thank you for everyone who will be viewing this recording tomorrow or in the years to come. So this was a wealth of information. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and I felt like I learned so much from each of the speakers. And I look forward to connecting with you in real life soon. Thank you, everyone, and we will speak once again soon. And to attendees and to the larger public, please do connect with state government. Please do connect with the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights and the New Jersey Division on Criminal Justice and all the state agencies within the Attorney General's office. Thank you and good night, everyone. Good night.